And if that's a problem, would be curious for you to tell us that it's a problem, and see what we can figure out. We're new at this, but if it's recorded, for the previous ones, we've posted them to YouTube. There's a YouTube channel. Should probably add that to the slide deck so people can find it more easily. And so if you speak and we're recording, you'll be recorded, of course. So caveat. And again, if that scares anybody and it prevents you from participating, I'd be very appreciative if you could let us know that that's the case, and because then recording it for YouTube may be having the opposite effect that we had hoped for. Also, as I mentioned, we're trying a different format. This is a fireside chat, so we're all sitting around the virtual fire and we're having a chat. And since there are double digits people on the call, we can't obviously talk at once. So what we're going to try and do is use the hand raise feature that Teams offers. And let's see, for me, on the main floating bar on top of the Teams, at the bottom on my Mac at least, there's a raise your hand, and I'm just going to click it now, and my hand is raised. I can click it again, unraise my hand. So we'll try to make sure that we'll process people in some sort of order. We'll try and keep it to the order that they raise their hands, where that makes sense. And I think Teams will keep track of who raised their hand first. And we'd like everybody to be able to participate. So that's just a mechanism for that. Well, we're trying new things, as I mentioned. So we'll see how that goes. Other than that, Jason, a lot. Veronika, probably a lot. Bill, very little. Have prepared some notes that, just to lead the conversation and share the, some of the learnings that we have. But the hope is that you all jump in and get involved and participate in the conversation. It's a fireside chat, not a fireside lecture. So with that, let me ask Veronika and Jason if I left anything out that I should mention.
I think you got everything.
Okay, excellent. So thanks. I'm going to turn it over then to you, Jason, to kick off the fireside chat. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome, everybody. So we wanted to kind of get together and talk about the Build conference this year and previous years, or kind of compare it to previous years and kind of our thoughts, what some of our, I've got a strange screen freeze. We just wanted to go over some of the announcements that we thought were interesting, and then also some of the related topics that may or may not have to do with an announcement per se, but some of the sessions that we attended, and pick other people's brains, as I'm sure some of you guys have been to previous Build conferences or attended some sessions at the conference this year. So just going to kick it off a little bit with talking about high level what the Build conference is and sort of my experience with it in the past, and then kind of get into Veronika's and try to get a conversation going here. So Bill, I see your hand up. Yeah. So I went to Build a couple years ago, and it was, of course, it was downtown Seattle. It's the conference is really geared towards developers, because last year I went to Ignite and it wasn't so developer oriented, which was fine. I just wanted to experience it, see how it was different than the Build conference. And between the Build conference and the Ignite conference, I definitely, as a developer, prefer the content that's at the Build conference. And when I went to it in Seattle, of course, it's like any other conference. It's multiple days. You're downtown the city. You have to deal with, you only have so much time during each of those days to get into the sessions that you want to get into. Sometimes they're at opposite ends of the convention center, which for Build, that also is a big pro, because the convention center is so much smaller than the convention center in Florida where Ignite was, because that building was a mile long. If your sessions weren't close together, it was kind of a problem at that point. But the Build conference, it was pretty convenient being downtown Seattle. So it was definitely nice to. I like to go downtown Seattle, but this year, we didn't have that. So, and also when I went to build, one of the cool things was it was my first year as a MVC. Is they had a fast lane for my first year as an MVP. So they had a fast lane for MVPs and RDs. So and they had reserved seating down front, and that was kind of cool. So that was kind of my first big tech conference, and so for Build, I kind of appreciate Build, thinking about that first experience that I had a couple years ago, and I know Veronika went last year, and I saw her tweet so much, and a little jealous because she interacted with so many more people than I did. It looked like she really had a good time. You want to share your experience at Build last year, Veronika?
Sure. It was super exciting. It was my first Build. That was awesome. And actually, it was my first Build. It was my first time in Seattle. And it was my first time being MVP. I got my MVP just a couple of days before Build. So I was excited, but I didn't have any, fancy things. I didn't have any special line there because no one knew me. I didn't even get my, stickers that I was an MVP. So I was hunting for the program managers to give me the sticker so people can see that I'm an MVP. So that was fun. Lots of sessions. I know that they changed it a little bit. I have nothing to compare with since it was my first one, but they changed the layout. So some of the bigger sessions they had in rooms, but lots of sessions they were just on the floor. So basically they had like a stand, and then a presenter was next to the stand, and then there were like a bunch of chairs around. So it was more informal. And even the keynote, they had just lots of chairs in the middle of that huge room, and people were coming in and taking the chairs or just standing around. I wasn't too late for the keynote, but I still didn't get a seat, so that was a little upsetting. But altogether, it was a great experience. I met so many people, talked to all those amazing people that I'm talking to online or I'm following on Twitter, ask questions. They were all super nice. So that was the best part. During sessions, you can learn some things, but I think it's better to learn when you are actually talking to people who are building all that stuff. And then, yeah, Seattle was amazing. I really like it there. The food wasn't good, and I'm not the only one who is complaining about that. This year, the food was definitely better, but the conversations were not there, so it was really hard to communicate with people or ask questions. Though they implemented really good that the forum/chat option, so you could still ask questions, but it was really hard to follow along the questions, and it's just hard when you are not in the same room with people. And yeah, I really miss people. So that's the downside of this year's Build.
Yeah, I'd have to totally agree with that. One good thing to the Build this year is you could do it you could watch it in your pajamas. You didn't have to worry about, because usually when I travel, everything's wrinkled, so I have to like iron it in the hotel room, and I didn't have to do any of that stuff. And like you said, the food was much better this year than the session. Now, Bill, you had been to Build before, or PDC, or which was what it was before Build?
I have been to Build, and before that there was a conference called the Professional Developers Conference, which maybe morphed into Build, not 100% sure.
Is that back in the years when you got some really, really good swag at the events? Like they used to give like laptops and phones.
Yeah, I
and
think
stuff.
I got a phone, a Windows phone. Yeah, I know, I was jealous. And I think I got an Xbox 360. I'm trying to remember if that was a PDC or a build. They gave us some heavy duty swag.
Yeah, so this year the swag wasn't quite as good.
Right.
There is some links online where you can get images for wallpapers and things like that. But yeah.
So can I pose a question here? Like Jason, for yourself, what are some of the topics that were at Build this year that you're most excited about?
Yeah, so what I wanted to get out of Build was as much container, Kubernetes, the stuff that I use for work. More or less, what could I learn that would help me in my everyday work? So I was really looking at sessions that had to do with Kubernetes and that sort of thing, containers, Kubernetes, and I found a few, but not as many as I was hoping. How about you two?
I was looking forward to learn more about all the cool stuff like AI and bots and the virtual reality and HoloLens. I know they were pushing a lot towards the power apps, so I don't know much about it, and it was kind of cool to see what you can do, and you don't have to be a developer to create cool things.
Is there a particular one that you either of you drilled into a little bit that you'd like to enlighten us on what's so cool about it?
Yeah, definitely. I have some stuff. Should we ask the crowd any questions before we get into like announcements and the sort of stuff that we really got out of it? What do you think? What do you guys think?
Sure, yeah. If anyone has a question, please.
Anyone want to raise their hand and give us any of their build experience this year or previous years? So it doesn't look like we have a very interactive crowd tonight, so that's cool.
Come on, folks. Who's going to be the brave first one? Oh, we got one. Gary.
I think, yeah.
We got Gary.
Hey guys. First of all, this is the first time I've been invited to Build, and I think it's because of my MSDN subscription, but that's beyond the point. One of the things I did notice was that as you guys are talking, there's a 15-minute break or so, or a 30-minute break between sessions. And so since we were doing this remotely, we really didn't have to wait that long for each talk. That was one thing. The other thing I was looking for was Blazor. They announced that WASM is now, you can code in WASM, which is the UI portion of it without having to use JavaScript.
Yeah, the client-side WebAssembly stuff.
Yeah, and then they also talked about Maui, which was a new project that Xamarin is moving toward, I guess. But Maui's not going to be around until next year, so I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to be able to use Maui since I don't have access to that. And then the other thing is if we do have another one of these, which is remote, it behooves people to sign up for the events that you want, because I waited till the last minute and said, well, it's virtual, you know, I can just kind of walk in and into it, but there's a certain limit to each of the sessions, so you need to pick the sessions that you want to go into. And those were my observations.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gary, because I had that frustration too. There were several sessions that sounded really good, but they were already full. And that really kind of surprised me. Like, well, it's virtual. Why can't I get in it? The room's not full. I mean, but I guess they either artificially put limitations or it was the framework that they were using. I'm not sure. Because some of the sessions I went to were team sessions. Like I went to a focus group, and that was a team session, and it was pretty much just like we set tonight up. You went to a link, and then you joined the teams like this, and that was actually when I was first exposed to the ability to raise your hand in Teams. Never saw it before, but that was a Teams session. But some of the others that I went to weren't. Some of them were actually pre-recorded ahead of time. But yeah, it was frustrating that some of them were actually full.
I think they were limiting the attendance, if you don't mind my piping up. They were limiting attendance on sessions where they really wanted audience feedback, just because they didn't want it to get too like really chaotic and stuff like that. Teams itself does have a limitation at 250 people in a standard Teams channel. So, the Teams live capability that they have, they didn't always use that, and those, can get, I guess, I don't know how many people they can put in a Teams live meeting, but which I think most of the sessions at Build were, if I recall correctly. But so it really depended on what the type of session was and whether they were looking for feedback or not, or targeting it for feedback. So,
did you attend very many sessions, Jim? Did you have any favorites?
Yeah, I tried to attend a good number of them. I was also trying to balance the fact that that was my biggest problem with Build this year was when you're there and attending in person, you can pretty easily get work to kind of lay off a little bit and let you attend the conference, especially since it's an investment that they've contributed to and all that stuff. But when you're doing it remotely like this, they don't really see the investment in it as easily, and so they're like, well, hey, you're not going anywhere, why don't you get some billable work in? And that's all well and good, but they didn't actually clear off the table for us to attend, really. So we kind of had to still get some, get our regular work day in and then attend sessions. But yeah, I definitely had a few favorites. Very interested in the Maui and the Project Reunion stuff, actually. But I won't dig in on that until we're to a point where that's fun to talk about, I guess.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I kind of had the similar experience. It's so much easier to make sure that you fill your day up when you don't want to sit in a hotel room. You traveled for the event. You want to go to the conference and experience it, whether you're on the floor of the expo talking to people or, maybe side meetings with people that you met up with there, or, going to sessions. But when you're home in your pajamas and you still have that day at work that you need to get stuff done, it is kind of hard to get the most out of the day, especially when you can always go back to it and watch it anytime you want. So it was definitely difficult for me to watch a lot of sessions. I think during the 2 days, I think I watched 6 sessions. That was pretty much it. I've watched a few since then, but yeah, I definitely had the same problem.
Yeah, that's actually one of my biggest concerns with recording sessions and stuff like that. It's like kind of reminds me of the the VHS and DVD collection that you spend all the resources buying those movies and videos, and then they sit on the shelf and you never actually pull them down and watch them. And that's something that I kind of worry with, like, build sessions and stuff like that. It's like, all right, they're online, they're available. By the time I get around to watch them, they're going to be a little dated already.
True.
So being there for it live makes a lot more sense. It's worth the investment. But kind of going back, it's like, I already know, a few things that are a little dated already, and that it won't be long before they're very dated. So
Yeah, that's true. A lot of this stuff. Bill was asking what was some of the stuff I was interested in, but so one of the things that goes along with the content, just stuff that you can consume, is the announcement, Microsoft Learn TV. It's basically, here, let me share my screen real quick. I can show you what it is real quick.
You have the slides, right, Jason?
I do. I was going to click on the link to show you the web page. Let me go back to Teams here. Share. Jump into this. Give you the context. So this is. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, cool. So this is one of the announcements that's in preview, Microsoft Learn TV. They came out with the Microsoft Learn last year, the year before. But this is kind of like you could go to this link, and anytime throughout the day, they're playing new content. And it's kind of a 24/7 location to get content as it's kind of going out. Zero downtime deployments. That sounds kind of interesting. I've kind of collected new content to consume, but I haven't gone here today and started watching stuff yet because I'm still going back to the build site itself. Speaking of, let me go back to the slide. So we put together some slides to kind of drive the conversation if we needed to. So here, this slide has the resources that we thought were kind of cool. So the digital swag.
Jason, I don't see the slide.
You don't see the slide? Okay, cool. I am sharing my app instead of my desktop then. Yeah.
We can see it now.
You can see this. You can see the slide now.
I see GitHub.
GitHub. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. See, I actually wanted to share the desktop. Let me stop sharing. Share desktop. Okay. Here we go. All right. That way you can get all the apps. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation now?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this GitHub that has some swag in it, but something that was kind of cool was the wallpapers that they put together. I thought about trying to use one of them for my background tonight, like the background for Maddie Ledger's kitchen. That might be kind of.
That is awesome. I wonder if she knows that we've got that.
I don't know. But yeah, so there's some different wallpapers, and this is on the location where you can actually download it for your computer. But that was build branded stuff. The important thing for everyone, if they haven't dug into what was announced at Build, is this group of content that they put together. They call Book of News. The interactive one's pretty good. There is a PDF version floating around somewhere, but the one on the web is much better because you can get the videos, and then of course there's a lot of hyperlinks that jump off the blog post with the information. Of course, you've got the table of contents, and then you can of course search it because it's a web page. But this is definitely a really good link to get, is the Book of News here. That's got all the announcements, the pre-announcements that they planned ahead of time. If you haven't dug into trying to find any of the content, you can always go to Channel 9. They still do have Channel 9 around, even though they're starting to put content in other locations.
So I really thought that there were some interesting insights directly in the Book of News's index.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just the way they organized some of the topics. So it's like if you look at it, a lot of the .NET and stuff like that is now under Azure, which I mean it kind of makes sense. Classically, that all would have been on probably connected to Windows because .NET was so deeply connected to the Windows platform, but it's not that anymore. So the only real news under Windows as a separate category, and it was interesting that it got its own separate category. It almost felt like it should have been a subcategory. Windows should have been a subcategory of Azure, just as Azure Client, I guess you could think of it. But it did get its own major heading, and the only real thing under it was Project Reunion.
Yeah, no, I looked through the table of contents a bit, but then I started searching through it, and I tried to kind of gauge what I wanted to watch from that, and there wasn't a lot of Kubernetes stuff, so I was kind of disappointed on that one. But yeah, so the Channel 9's got the videos, but the event build site's a lot more useful. So you can go here and do a nice searching. It shows you the 3 days that they were run, but like this is an Azure user group, so if you type in Azure, it'll give you all of the sessions that have to do with Azure, and there's like 206 sessions.
I found Jason that I was trying to search for like specific content through here, and it was fairly useless. Like I was looking for stuff on app services, I think, and I had, which should only be like 10 hits maybe, and I was getting like multiple pages.
Yeah. Okay. So I have the same issue. It's kind of like using Google. Sometimes you just have to find the right phrase to query. But see, and this actually highlights another thing with this year's build is you see duplicates in here. So since it was a 48-hour straight content being played, you actually had more than one chance to catch a lot of the sessions. So and the sessions that were live, because some of them were pre-recorded and just you had a link to it. But the live ones, oftentimes the Q&A session was different between one versus the other, but the content was pretty much the same, but the Q&A sessions would differ. And they tried to play them at different times so that it would catch one side of the world versus the other side of the world. So it'd be different ends of the business day or different ends of the day, or sometimes it'd be one running one day and then one at a completely different time the next day. So you do get a lot of duplicates in here when you're searching, or it appears to be duplicates. But yeah, so the search isn't the best. It's not Google, but it does provide some sort of filtering for you. Versus like Channel 9, it's not quite as good either. Maybe they use the same search engine, so they don't have a search. They don't have a sub search for this. They have a filter, sort by level. But yeah, one thing that is kind of cool about this site. So this is the MS Build site. If you go into one of these, like for instance, I said I was looking for a lot of Kubernetes stuff. So Kubernetes, see what comes back with this one. There weren't too many sessions, and you can see there's several duplicates. But let's go into this one. So Azure Arc. Oftentimes the big thing that I go to these, especially if I don't make it to like build or ignite, is I'll go to this and I'll watch the session, which is, it's nice because you can speed it up and not be just one times play. But the related links are almost all hyperlinks here. They don't really give you the download of the presentation these days, or on this site. But you can, they do link the relevant sites, which is kind of cool. For some of them, it's a little more useful than others. Some of them really have context-friendly related links. Others are real general. Like, let's see if this is Azure Arc and Kubernetes. Let's see if it even takes us. Okay, so at least it takes us to the document for the session that we were at, not just generally the docs. So it is nice that they did connect some of the dots to add more value to the content. It would be a really nice touch to give you a download for the presentations too, though it is kind of questionable as to how valuable having a PowerPoint really is. It is nice to kind of give you, one of the things I do like to download the content ahead of time is to see whether or not it's something I want to watch. because it's kind of hard to preview a session.
I would say that I get that point, Jason, that downloading a presentation in advance would be pretty useful to gauge your interest level, or whether it's too superficial, maybe you're trying to dig in and learn a lot more, whether it's high level or, really advanced. But if they do point to the official docs, that content is going to age much better than a presentation would. And they've really done a fantastic job over the last few years of building out their docs.microsoft.com site. It's really first class. It was not nearly as well structured and rich as it is these days, just a few years ago.
Totally true. So this slide's the important one that has all the high level stuff. Some of the announcements that I thought was interesting beside the TV was Windows Terminal. I've been watching it for a while, but it hadn't been announced. And like my laptop has the slow ring insiders build on it for Windows, so I get some of the new stuff. But my desktop's not even on Windows Insiders build, so it's a lot slower than the one on my laptop. So my laptop, I've had WSL2 and Terminal for a while, but I haven't been using them day to day because they're not on my desktop. But Windows Terminal 1 is now available for recent builds of Windows, which is kind of cool. And I definitely want to show that in a few minutes if we have a chance. Here's some of the stuff I thought was interesting around AKS for any of you who are interested in the Kubernetes side of things. Is they GA'd a few things that were already in preview, but Windows Server support. I mean, that's kind of important to have pools of Windows Server containers running and have it GA'd for production purposes. And following the trend of putting everything on a private link in Azure, they've now got it so that you can put the Azure Kubernetes API, which is a public endpoint, compared to like an Azure Web Sites application. It's on the internet, but it is protected by authorization. But now with the private link, you can create your private cluster, because your cluster work compute was always able to be on a virtual network and not in the public IP space, but the API always was. You could do whitelisting, so you could whitelist APIs, but you couldn't put it in your virtual network. Now you can. So that was also announced. And a couple things that were announced just slightly before build, but there were some build sessions related to it, was the Azure Spot for AKS. You can actually, if you have like a dev cluster or QA cluster, test cluster, if you've got something that's really built like Netflix that you can put a chaos monkey in, this would also apply to you in production, but it's in preview, of course. But Azure Spot is the the cheaper way to get VM resources. So you could put an AKS cluster up on these resources and save. They were saying you can get savings between 45 and almost 90% sometimes on the resources that you want. Now, I don't know if, since everyone's working from home and, we've learned that compute is not infinite in cloud anymore. I'm not sure if the savings are quite as steep as they once were, but that's definitely one way to save. And the other way coming down the line to save that they still haven't been able to light up in too many locations is the AMD chips. Those VMs are a lot cheaper than the Intel chips. So I've been kind of watching what's the cheapest ways to get Kubernetes, and the Spot one's the one that they previewed. And there's also this new optional uptime SLA, because the thing is with AKS is you have the underlying VMs, but the whole management plane is not, you don't pay for it. So since you don't pay for it, then Microsoft really can't put an SLA on it. So they now will take your money and give you an SLA for it. So there's this whole optional SLA you can get, and that I also found kind of interesting, because it's really geared towards, okay, so how can we service the customers that have these requirements of SLAs. So those were some of the announcements that I was definitely interested in.
Jason, I'm fascinated by this optional SLA. I honestly hadn't realized that the controller was not under SLA. So how much are they charging for the SLA?
So here's the pricing. So you've got to choose, I think it's in East US, 10 cents per cluster per hour. So that's at 9.95.
Okay, well that's not, and that's per cluster. That's not too bad. Okay.
Per hour. Yeah.
Oh, per hour. Oh no.
Yeah.
Well, what's that? That's
72 bucks.
50 cents a day.
72 bucks.
Sounds about like a VM to me.
Yeah.
So they must need to make it highly available, more or less.
That's actually reasonable.
Not that I'd hope it's highly available to begin with, but we're just not paying for it.
Right. That's what I was hoping to, I guess. Hey, Jason, you mentioned something a minute ago about private link that's a good launch point for a quick comment. One of the things that I've noticed over the years with Azure, like anybody who's been watching Azure for a while, you've seen it kind of grow up, right, and fill out all the functionality. Kubernetes, for example, now you can have private link, which is a security feature. But some other examples of security features that are kind of filling out the platform are that, here's a couple more examples that along that theme. The Azure Security Center, which is if you're not familiar, it's a place to examine the health of your resources. And this is anything from maybe I have a database that doesn't have proper firewall rules, maybe it's wide open, or I have some storage that isn't encrypted, or I have a virtual machine that isn't patched, stuff like that it can statically scan. It also has some dynamic scans, or dynamic responsiveness, like it's advanced threat protection, it calls it. Things like if your SQL database seems to be undergoing like a SQL injection attack, if it notices that, or it's exfiltrating an unusually large amount of data, it can give you some real-time alerts of those things. So some of them are config related, some of them might be, your app's been cracked kind of thing. But they have this secure score that is they've gamified the idea of how secure you are. And just as an example of maturing that, finally you can interact with the secure score via an API. And also they have, so that's one example. They're filling in the details. They're checking the more and more of the boxes. Azure Sentinel, which is their SIEM, their incident and event management security tool, where all of your logs, security-related logs, can be aggregated in one place and analyzed holistically. That now has multi-tenant capabilities, where if you want to look across multiple systems that aren't all in the same workspace, you can now look at that under one pane of glass. That's an example that's getting more sophisticated. And even private link, like Jason mentioned, is making its rounds and becoming available with more and more services. Azure Kubernetes Service, for one. Another one I know that lit up recently was with Azure Key Vault. And that should just be their end game. Like everything ultimately is going to have, for example, private link. And one more small example is in the beginning, if you wanted to encrypt something like a SQL database or a storage account, the keys were all managed by Microsoft. So you could check a box in the portal and have your data encrypted at rest, and Microsoft manage the keys. Just as another example of them filling out their security feature set is more bring your own key features have lit up. I know recently, it wasn't at Build, it was a little while ago, maybe 6 months ago, Azure SQL Database lit up with that, I believe. And then Now, Azure Key Vault, this is another feature that's available there, so you can bring your own key to Azure Key Vault encryption too. So just thematically, the security platform continues to mature and continues to fill in small gaps. So it's good sign of health.
That's really interesting stuff, Bill. Thanks.
Welcome.
Jason, a quick interrupt. Can you, or somebody who, if it was Veronika, I'm sorry, the link or the something flew by about zero downtime deployments. I'd love to see that link. I can't find it.
Yeah, that was for Pass.
Yeah. Okay.
That was on the Learn TV. See if it's still up here. There's a session coming up. Zero downtime deployments with Azure Passes. 6:45. You're missing it by 3 minutes. On Learn TV right now.
So yeah, that's all live stuff. So they're not recording that, you think?
It's got to be available somewhere. I mean, they wouldn't produce the content and then just let it disappear.
Yeah.
So it's
okay.
it's being done by MVP and RD. But yeah, here I can make sure I put this in the chat here. So, chat.
Oh, I got it.
Oh, you
It's
got
on
it?
it's on channel 9, evidently.
Is it on channel 9 too?
Well, there's something from March 31st with that
Okay.
title. It's on channel 9.
It might be the same thing.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I had a couple of things here from Veronika too. So you want to talk about these, Veronika?
Sure. I just have a couple of slides there. So I was really impressed by the announcements related to machine learning and bot framework. I think last year they were really pushing towards, everyone was pushed towards Azure, and every other announcement was related to Azure. This time they announced lots of things, and they were trying to connect them to Azure, but not all of them were on Azure. Like responsible ML, that is really cool. And we actually, if you attended our meetup last year, when we celebrated our anniversary of Boston Azure, we actually learned about responsible ML before it was officially announced. We had a team from Microsoft, and they were talking about it, and they showed some examples. So it was amazing. And now during build, they had several sessions related to responsible ML, and that is really important, because you need to make sure that your model doesn't have any bias, that the data is correct, that you as a human, you have lots of power to actually train your model and create AI model that is, it is fair, it is including different aspects that are important for your application, for that specific model, and then you can change it. And then Microsoft is helping you to achieve that. That is actually mostly for researchers, for people who are doing machine learning full time. But it's just interesting to see how what they do there, how they're helping everyone, how you can use the Jupyter notebooks with responsible machine learning. I hope some of you had a chance to attend the session for our meetup. If not, then check the blog post, check the video recordings from Build. There were several sessions around that. And then bot framework.
Hey, Monica,
Yeah.
can I inject a comment on the
Sure.
responsible ML? Yeah, thanks. So I remember one of the points they made about responsible machine learning and AI was that they wanted to have transparency into how it works. So you can't tell if it's biased unless you understand it. And another principle that they talked about was like using it responsibly. I believe that's they have. It's not telling you how an algorithm works, but it's their responsible use of AI. And they just announced, I think it was today, that they are not going to sell face recognition technology to police departments anymore. So I think that's them trying to live by their, you know, with everything that's going on today. And responsible ML is you know, part of a solution here where I think it might have been from the lecture we had at Boston Azure, where we learned that different races might come up with more false positives than others, right? So part of responsible ML is you know, having your technology work for everybody, not just for the people who are building it out in Redmond, say, but for the whole country and the whole world. So I found that was kind of topical.
Yeah. There are lots of options how you can you know, change the parameters and make sure that you include everything that is important, and you know, make sure that the model is not biased. I didn't use it myself. I just read about it and you know, attended the session. That was really good. Watched a couple of sessions during build. I am not on that level of understanding how machine learning works, but I'm trying to you know, learn more about it, and it's really cool. They're definitely moving forward. Okay, can we move back to the slides? Okay, so the bot framework, that is actually close to what I am doing. I had a couple of projects with the bot framework, so I am really following their announcements. I'm really following their news, and they released bot framework SDK 4.9 with lots of cool things. So there's like the whole list. Integration with Microsoft Teams, and another cool thing is that actually if you have several bots, they can be combined together as skills. So each bot is a skill, can be used as a skill for another bot, and then you can create the whole bot tree with different bots combined together, and they pass in you know, information back and forth. Also, adaptive dialogues. I know they were talking about it a lot before, and they did lots of work around it, because that is really important. Because you know, sometimes you can enforce a user to ask specific questions. And I remember I had lots of issues when I was building bots and virtual assistant skills. You kind of forcing your users to ask specific questions or choose an answer between 2 or 3 options. But you know, sometimes, most of the time, you shouldn't do it. And adaptive dialogues can help developers to, without you know, extra effort, to integrate adaptive dialogue. So even if your user is not following your scenario that you created, that's fine. Your bot is not going to be confused. The bot is going to still return correct information. Or you know, another cool thing, it can actually now pass the conversation to real person. So they have the handoff. And I think I have it in my slides. Yeah, so the human handoff, here's the YouTube video. So you can either watch this video or watch videos that they have on the Channel 9 or any build sessions related to that. That is really cool. So they integrated, they can be integrated, I think, with 2 services that can actually connect bots with humans. So if your bot is confused or your customer actually insisting to talk to a real person, and there are lots of cases that when they actually need to talk to a real human, that is really now it's an option. You can integrate it with those services using still bot framework. And if we go back to the slides, yeah, okay. So I mentioned the skills, and I missed the composer. So bot framework composer, that is basically a UI tool where you can drag and drop some boxes and arrows, and then create your dialogues, create parts of your dialogues. But the cool thing is that you are still getting your solution and with project inside with real files. So you can either use the UI or you can use Visual Studio or whatever ID you're using there, and continue. Maybe you start in the composer and then you move to your Visual Studio and then continue doing it there. So that is really cool. I know they were telling about exporting from Power Virtual Agent to Bot Composer, so they are working towards it. I know they showed the demo where they did it, but I think it was like really raw demo. They basically kind of combined it just for build. It is not actually working, so you can't connect both Framework Composer with Power Virtual Agent. And Power Virtual Agent, I think I have it in my slides, but maybe not. So Power Virtual Agent, that is also, maybe next slide.
Yeah, it's right there.
I didn't put a link, but if you Google it, they I think they released it last year, and this year they actually, with everything that is happening in Power Platform, now they have so many cool things. Like one of them is Power Virtual Agent, so you don't have to be a developer, you don't have to write any code to create your bot. It is the drag and drop experience. You can upload some probably PDF or FAQ page if you have, then it's going to parse. It is pretty intuitive. It is, I think it's easier to understand how it all works without going back to documentation. But for the Bot Framework Composer, you probably need to read a little more about it, because there are so many things going on at the same time, and you actually have code, and you actually need to understand what's going on in Composer. But for Power Virtual Agent, you can be just a business user. You don't have to code anything. And so, initially they're gonna connect the Composer and the Power Virtual Agent, so you'll be able to, extract your files from one thing to another and then connect them together. And they can be skills for each other. So if you create a Power Virtual Agent bot, then you can use it as a skill for your bot that you created in the Composer. And then, cognitive services, they didn't talk about them a lot. So they, those 2 links, they are, showing basic updates. They moved some things to GA. They still have a bunch of things in preview. Nothing revolutionary happening there, but small things like they add in more neural voices for speech. That is great because before they had, I think, 3 or 4. Now they have 11 in different languages, and 15 new voices. Yeah, that's awesome. And small things here and there, and then Q&A maker. You can actually. So in Q&A maker, you can have that chit chat. So some things they are already pre-built for you, so you are not starting completely from scratch. Language understanding and text analytics, they're enhancing them slowly, and adding new small features. They're maybe not as huge as like the bot framework, but still, if you're using those things every day, then that will definitely solve some of your problems. Okay, and let's move back. And I put the Onyx runtime here just to mention so you know about it. They added some key optimization techniques that were built for training the Turing model for the Onyx runtime. So they will be available, I think now it's June already, so probably now. I haven't checked it. So Onyx, that's their open source machine learning tool. It is kind of like TensorFlow, but yeah, I shouldn't compare those things because they're completely different. But there are lots of different tools, and Onyx is among them. And ML.NET, I don't remember if they had a session about it, and if they specifically mentioned all those improvements. Maybe they did. Maybe I just missed the session. But later on I attended that ML.NET conference. I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago. Yeah, I don't remember. And there they were specifically talking about ML.NET and new features there. So now Model Builder is part of Visual Studio. You don't have to install it separately. And Model Builder is basically also a UI tool that allows you to have all the benefits of the AutoML. So you don't have to, start building your models from scratch. You just basically using that UI tool called Model Builder, uploading your data or connecting to your database, and choose the scenario here. And based on AutoML capabilities, it will choose the best model type for your data, and then you'll get a model. You're basically getting 2 projects connected. There are 2 projects in your solution. One is your model, your ML.NET model, and then the second is a console project that you can use for testing your model. And then, once you get your model, then you can use it in your applications, like any kinds of applications. And also they have a new feature in the Model Builder. You can connect it to Azure Machine Learning. So it wasn't available before. And in general, they updated the UI. It is looking way better than it was before. They added new scenarios. Oh, doesn't work. Okay, that happens. But yeah, in general, you don't need to install Model Builder if you want to try ML.NET, and you don't have to be a scientist to use ML.NET. That is for C# and F# developers. It is really easy to start. I tried it. I had a couple of sessions where I explained how I used it. And there was the whole ML.NET conference recently, so they also had lots of videos posted on YouTube if you want to learn more about it. And I think that's it for me, Jason.
Cool. I had a few others. Like I mentioned, the majority of the stuff I was looking at was geared towards Kubernetes or stuff that I use in a day-to-day. And there was this. This was a pre-recorded session by Sean McKenna that you can watch, having to do with Kubernetes best practices. It was a good session. Really brought up a lot of stuff and highlighted some of the new features that they've turned on in the Azure portal. It's becoming more and more integrated with like the advisor, and they've actually started adding more useful stuff. So I can show you the two things that I found most valuable out of that talk was this new item under diagnose and solve problems. If you click on that, you'll be taken to this when you get two choices, cluster insights or networking. Cluster insights, it scans your cluster for certain things, gives you a green check mark or some information. And I don't have any red errors, which is cool. But they do give you some warnings. You can find out more information about them. And it's actually been pretty useful. Like, for instance, one of the things this view has been nice for is I have some jobs that run, cron jobs. So they run as a container and then they go away. So if you're looking at your history or logs in Kubernetes, by itself, you don't see a lot. But this view would surface jobs that were being killed because they ran out of memory and tried to restart. So this would highlight the OOM kills, which was very useful for me to track down that one of the jobs actually needed more memory than what we were giving it. And then the Azure Advisor recommendations, they've tied those into the AKS cluster as well. And this is just a sample cluster. There's not going to be any recommendations here, but they do scan it. If you click on this link, it'll show you all the recommendations that they will look for. So that's actually that link was actually pretty interesting. Wait, sorry, going around here. Or I should say it was about an hour long, but it was pretty good. It had quite a bit of good content in it, especially if you're using AKS, and then it highlighted these new blades. This link is actually pretty useful, and it was just kind of mentioned in one of the sessions. It's a blog on Medium, and I don't know if any of you guys out there use AKS and you turn on the insights for containers, and before you know it, you're paying as much for ingesting metrics. Yeah, so you're not alone. If you've run into that, this is the article that you want to read. This was written by one of the guys on the Azure Monitor team, how to fine-tune your capturing of metrics so that you're not paying as much for ingestion as you do compute. So that was definitely a really good find.
Jason, is this, do you think, just AKS, or you think it's more general to App Insights?
That's a good question. I believe
it looks general from that.
It is kind of general, but it's geared towards the container pieces, which is going to be your AKS.
Yeah. So we have some app services. It's obviously it's different than AKS, but we also finding that our Azure App Insights bill is getting increasingly bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah.
In production.
And when it's your ingestion fee, it's not like you can get that any smaller. I mean, even if you're not keeping it, I mean, we all know that if you're keeping storage around, it's going to cost some money. But if you're not keeping very much data, but you get that cost at just ingesting the data, so that you get the charts for the few days or 30 days that you're actually keeping. That it's just frightening when you see that costs as much as your compute does. But this is an article that they recommended you look at if that is your feedback as to at using Azure Monitor, because it was a session having to do. Let me show you. I've got the notes here. So it was Azure Monitor for containers. This was the session that I was on. Actually, it was a focus group. So you may or may not be able to find this recording, but the gem in that focus group was that link, that this medium link right here. But yeah, that was one of the key takeaways that I had, was that that article, because it's been a real pain point. And last but not least was the Windows terminal. So I do use, I often use the WSL for Ubuntu to interact with Kubernetes, but with and you can see I have all these icons across the bottom. But now with Terminal 1 being out, I can get rid of some of my icons on the bottom, because I can use the Linux here, the command prompt PowerShell, and you can even do a Cloud Shell here. So I can get rid of like 4, or I can get rid of 3 of these icons that I have in my bar. So if you guys aren't familiar with Terminal, it's basically for those of you who present or have vision issues, like the older I get, the more I get, is you can actually easily scale this by the mouse, like anything else, where you could do the control and then roll it on your mouse. That's super nice. I mean, it's strange that that's such a nice feature. But you can also get all of your other terminals all in this one location. So I can go to command line, I can go from PowerShell to command line, I can go to Ubuntu, and then they're really starting to add a lot of features to this until you get used to it. So one of the cool features, because there are other terminals that friends of mine use that have multiple screens, but so this has multiple screens. If you do Shift-Alt-D, it'll split the screen. So now I can get 2 of them next to each other. Because one of the things that I'll often do is I'll tail or watch a log on Kubernetes, and it just needs to run. But right before I started using this, I had to have one window open and do the actual work in another window and see events happen. So it's kind of nice that, you know, Microsoft has actually created a terminal that does this, because there are many other terminals that do it, and you can keep splitting them. I just did something I didn't mean to do, but it's highly customizable. If you go to the drop down here and you go settings, this is where it will open a JSON file. This is where the settings are for your profile, and you can customize it a little bit, but until you get used to what it's doing, you might wonder what the shortcut keys are. This is kind of hidden. If you go to the drop down, you hold down on, I believe it's the Alt key, and click settings. That opens up the defaults. Now, this is not an editable file. This is generated, but this is a JSON file that will show you the defaults that are set up for the system. So these are some of this is like some of the settings that you can change in your settings file, but these are the defaults of what it currently is. So if you want to change something, you can look and see what it is currently, because this is the fine-grained, like colors. But all the way at the bottom are the shortcut keys. So here are the shortcut keys that are default out of the box. So duplicate keys, next tab, previous tab. So if you want to learn how to use it a little bit better, it's probably documented somewhere, but this is just as fast as trying to Google it. But it's kind of a hidden thing to have to hold down the Alt key whenever you go to the settings. But that was an interesting talk to finally, you know, like I said, I've been paying attention to this for a while, but I haven't been using it because I just haven't been able to install it on my desktop. But now I can actually install it on my desktop. Pretty slick. And the interaction with Docker is so much nicer than it was before. Okay, so let's close all. And I believe that was all the items that I had.
I have one more I can add, which is another piggyback off some of the Kubernetes stuff you were talking about. Is so in the old days of Azure, Azure used to have something they only talked about. I think my visual there isn't very good. I'm just going to turn off video. They used to have something called the Azure Appliance, and I don't know if they ever really shipped it, but it was talked about a lot. So you could have your own Azure in your own data center, and I don't think the appliance went anywhere. Then it resurfaced some years later as Azure Stack, and Azure Stack was actually a more, I think that got more traction. I don't know how much traction. I don't really have any insight. I use the public cloud, so I don't really have I don't pay a lot of attention to Azure Stack, which is a similar API experience as the public cloud, except it has fewer services and you can run them on-prem. Again, I don't really know much about it, but I did notice that at Build, many of the announcements were centered around Azure Stack Hub, and I guess it's a rebranding of Azure Stack, if I'm understanding it correctly. Somebody can correct me if I don't have this quite right, because when I read the description, Azure Stack Hub is an extension of Azure, just like Azure Stack was in Azure Appliance before that provides a way to run apps on-prem and deliver Azure services within your data center. But the thing about this is that I found most interesting was that they're aligning it with edge computing, IoT, and other things that really have that are much bigger drivers now than they were back in the early days of Azure when they were trying to figure out the Azure appliance and how to get people to run this in their data center. Maybe the killer app is that Azure, for Azure not running in Azure Cloud, but running outside of it, is machine learning running on an IoT device that doesn't have a network connection all the time, for example, and so forth. And there were a bunch of announcements around Azure Stack Hub. Some of it relates to their partner ecosystem. Some of it is new capabilities that light up, like some aspects of Azure Container, networking interfaces, fleet management, Azure Container Registry, and a couple other ones. But just thematically, it seemed kind of interesting that was the focus. Does anybody know, have any better insight than I do on what Azure Stack Hub is intended for? Did I get it roughly right?
I personally don't know either, but I did see that there were, like, I've got it on the screen there. They did do quite a few announcements around Azure Stack, and they do seem to be adding more and more to it. But the Azure Stack Hub, I'm not sure.
Veronika, did you have any final observations you wanted to share?
No, I think I covered everything. Maybe we can move to questions, and maybe someone can share their insights and what they liked and what was exciting.
Yeah, so just to piggyback off Veronika's comment, we'd love to hear your feedback, of course, and your questions and comments. But also, before you vanish, we'd also like to hear your feedback on this session. Is this a good format for you? Any ideas for us would be appreciated. We're still trying to figure this whole virtual thing out, and so we're experimenting some. But it's hard to get feedback unless we get it from people like you who actually attend it. So to Veronika's first point, love to hear your comments on Build and what excited you, and if you're especially excited about something, if you'd be interested in requesting a talk on it, like a 60-minute version of Azure Bot Framework or something. Any thoughts from anybody? Just unmute yourself and speak up. Looks like the hand waving thing didn't turn out to be that important after all.
I think you guys are doing a good job.
Hey there. Oh, sorry. Someone else go ahead for it.
Good.
Oh, you got your hand shot up there. Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Kyle?
I just wanted to give all the presenters, Bill and Jason and Veronika, kudos. Thank you for giving us the guided tour. I think it's it's very easy to just kind of lurk and absorb information, and I think it makes the presentational format very organic for remote things with groups that don't necessarily know each other and can get in. I think it being physically co-located makes it much easier to just kind of have those hallway conversations and not feel like you're interrupting someone. It's easy to have someone go on a roll, and I've just learned a lot. Absorbing things through osmosis and hear people talk is always nice, so thank you for driving that, even if engagement can be difficult. We have been using Bot Framework recently to kind of augment all of our call center staff that we've had to spin up, who have been very overwhelmed, and so we've built everything into their knowledge base. And so a lot of Veronika's updates hit close to home. I was like, man, I gotta go look at skills, and I gotta go look at escalate to person, because now we've forked off some of the work that we've done, and we spun up like 4 bots in the last couple months here. And there was some unification work, but everyone has their own content authorship and guarded about who can actually log in. So that's kind of fizzled out, even though it's all kind of part of the bigger organizational thing that would make sense for all of them to be able to leverage information in other knowledge bases. So I definitely have to look into that after tonight. Another big piece of Q&A Maker that got a refresh during build was they used to have everything editable in Markdown in terms of the answers, in terms of links and bolding. And for probably people on this chat, for developers, that's not super scary. But for people in a communications department, that's not their linguista franca. That's not something that they like doing. And I'll also boot, I write down and mark down every single day. Their variant was really bad. It killed white space, and so any line returns got automatically converted to like /n/n. So if you wanted to do list in Markdown, it was /n/n immediate asterisk space, and there were no carriage returns anywhere that were allowed. So it made it really hard to actually read what was going on and see paragraphs and stuff. And now they have a nice WYSIWYG editor, and it makes it way easier to actually manage that content, which really democratizes the people putting in the content, which is the whole point of Q&A Maker existing in the first place, is that anybody can go put stuff in there. So that's been something interesting to learn about. Certainly if there's we've spent a good chunk of time doing it, so if to the immediate point before this, if folks want a 60-minute overview of Bot Framework, I feel equipped to do it at this point, because I've done it organizationally for setting up other departments 4 times now. So it's somewhat rehearsed in terms of getting people onboarded to that. That's most of my thoughts and takes on this. Thanks, all.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Kyle. In case we want to take you up on the offer to share more about Bot Framework later, would you mind reaching out to one of us so we have a contact?
Yeah, I think I'm friends with Veronika on Twitter. I don't know. I guess we follow each other. Yeah, I can put it in the chat. We can certainly reach out and talk about what would be a good vehicle for doing that.
Fantastic. Others?
I think someone else had a question before. Questions, comments, concerns, Gary?
Okay, yeah. I just want to follow up on what you said, Bill, was that I remember going to an Azure, that worldwide event, I forget what it's called, but the Mill5 organization, I think they actually purchased an Azure appliance, and I think they said it wasn't cheap, as they kind of said, and then they said that they powered up, it was really noisy, but they probably would be someone on that team over there probably could help you if you had more questions about the follow-on product you were referring to. So
Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing for Kyle, if you're still on, I just was thinking that, for someone who's even considering a bot, is like, what's the cost for proof of concept, on, creating a bot? You're talking about an organization that you're not sure that you're going to have the throughput that your call center at the Vermont institution that you work for, Kyle, as opposed to a small company where you're not sure that you're going to get that much calls that come in that would actually hit the bot and things like that. So I was wondering about, in terms of cost of starting up and things like that. So those are just some of my thoughts right now. And that's about it.
Great question. I have costs. Can I share my screen? I don't have to. I can just. I can send you some links. I did a cost analysis of putting together a bot for when we were doing this.
I just made your presenter.
We're just gonna go through my work emails. Come back to me, so we're not waiting. Poking at while I search this, but then I'll share some of our onboarding observations to that.
No other questions, comments? I know I still have a list of sessions from Build that I want to watch. It's just now that it's further and further away, like someone mentioned, maybe I forget who mentioned it, but it's like the further away you get, the less relevant or the more outdated it's going to be. So it's not hot to watch anymore,
Oh, real world costs here.
Oh, whoops, I think I was muted. So people should be able to see this. Yeah, so they have a very generous test tier. When you stand up a bot, there are lots of services that come alongside that. Heck, we can log into Portal to Azure. See what it's been billing us. But cognitive search is one of them. You need to get an app services plan. Those have a lot of different tiering and scales. You need cognitive services and bot services. There are a couple other. There's AI that or the application insights and stuff. There are a couple other services, but these were the ones that materially affected the cost. For your test system, there are just some real low-level tiers worth of stuff that you can do. It might run you $9 a month. For production, which is all we have, we don't really have a dev environment other than our local machines on here. And the way that they provision some in Azure, some test tier services are per subscription. You're only allowed one of them. So I think the Azure Cognitive Search is one of the expensive ones. The F test tier, you can only have one per subscription. So if you wanted to stand up a dev test environment that were both cheap, you'd probably one of those would have to get a lower tier. But production, it's $164 a month. It's compared to the cost of a call center, it's nothing. So $174 a month all in is probably not bad. We don't actually get a huge volume of stuff on this right now. I mean, I think we get 500 messages a day, which is not trivial. But we're going in production. We're going nowhere near any kind of limits that we would possibly have on it. So it's like all things in the cloud, and you can kind of scale out as needed and reprovision stuff. We ran into some weird stuff where cognitive services is one of the very few things Azure has where the scale out SKUs, the scale out ability to go change between services has a lifetime SKU. It doesn't allow you to manage it during a instance, so you have to stand up a brand new one and then move a whole bunch of indexes. They have like a .NET package solution that kind of helps with that a little to migrate stuff over. And then delete the old one and kind of repoint some things. So there is a way to do it long term, and I think they're working on in their feature backlog for that team is seeing that they can transfer across SKUs. Yeah. Feel free to, if we have time for it though, feel free to ask any other questions that if folks are interested in it, or if there's tons of interest, we can certainly find a time to go over more stuff in that space.
Thanks, Kyle.
Cool. Always nice to hear real world stuff. Definitely.
Yeah, I started researching the virtual assistant template. I think I forgot to put it in the slides and I forgot to mention it. That is something really interesting. It's like the whole new template for if you create a virtual assistant skill, and it provides you out of the box lots of cool stuff like connection to Q&A Maker and Lewis, and option to deploy it, and it's pretty much like it mini working a virtual assistant skill out of the box, and you can just build on top of it. So it's really cool. I'm actually writing a blog post about it, so probably I'll publish it sometime soon. Yeah, I'm just a slow writer, but it's cool. I was impressed by that template.
Well, are there any final comments from anybody on the call?
Oh, I kind of say a lot of things, so I might just add my 2 cents here. Is that this virtual thing is kind of exciting because I've actually logged into the Zurich user group, and so you don't have to limit yourself in this area anymore. And so it's noontime for me over here, but for them it's after hours, and they all have a toast where they all kind of raise their own beers and after the event and things like that. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I did at the build event was that I logged in really East Coast time, which obviously build in the West Coast hasn't started yet. They're 3 hours behind us. And so I was able to actually see build from the UK because it's during their time at work and things like that. And so for machine learning, I think, I'm not sure which one it was they were talking about one product which is still in preview where it's used by lawyers actually to go through a bunch of documents, PDFs and things like that, and condense it or something like that if you're looking for something specific. And so I think it was actually a product that Microsoft has, which is out of the box that you can actually use. But I just remember going around, that's a really cool product, And so that's something I was going to go look into. But those are some of the observations I've had while I've been staying at home here.
On that note, on Gary's note, who's dialing in from the farthest away? Who's furthest from Boston? Kyle, are you from Vermont?
Yeah, I guess Burlington, Vermont is the place to beat.
Anybody out further than Burlington, Vermont?
Distance.
All right, we'll have to keep track and see how much reach we get. See if we get any callers in from Zurich.
Or the West Coast. Bill Pratt was on a few of them earlier. Not today.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks,
Sounds
guys.
good.
Is there a place where you guys post the slides?
We can. Where'd be the best place to put them? Probably the Slack group, or what I'll do is I'll stick them in blob storage. We put them in the Slack group. I can also put it in a comment on the meetup, so you can get them from either location.
Oh, that would be great. Thanks, Jason.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks. Good night.
Good night,
Thanks,
folks.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Fire
Oh.
on the pyramid on the moon.